This is the story of Eric, an ordinary fisherman who, as he does every day, takes his small boat out to sea to catch fish. However, on that particular day, circumstances suddenly take an unexpected turn. Despite the clear weather, within just a few minutes, a thick fog covers everything, and he completely loses his way. Just then, Eric spots an old deserted boat floating in the water in the distance. Curiously, he ties his boat to the ship's side and decides to go inside and look. As he steps inside, his hair stands on end. The entire ship is completely empty, not a single sound, just a terrifying silence that makes his heart pound. The peculiar thing was that everything on the ship appeared completely fresh and meticulously organized. Food had been prepared and left, the dishes were sparkling clean, and clothes were neatly arranged. And in numerous places, it truly felt as though someone had been present there just a short while ago, yet not a single soul was anywhere to be found. Eric struggles to start the ship's engine, but it gives absolutely no response. Confronted by an empty vessel in the middle of such a vast and open sea, he grows even more distressed. He attempts to scan the surroundings with his binoculars, hoping to spot another vessel or perhaps a signal for assistance. However, the fog is incredibly thick, making it impossible to see anything. Eventually, he makes his way to the control room and attempts to broadcast a distress call over the radio. He transmits a message stating that his ship is completely stranded at sea and urgently requests that if anyone hears his voice, they respond without delay. After sending his message over the radio, Eric came onto the deck, preparing to return to his ship. But the moment he glanced down, his face went completely white. His own small boat was no longer there, despite the fact he'd tied it firmly. Not only that, the thick, heavy fog that had covered everything just moments ago had suddenly disappeared, and the sky above was now perfectly clear. It was already well past noon. He couldn't understand how or when all of this had happened. He had no other choice left to him now. He returns to that mysterious ship and, with the help of maps, tries to figure out exactly where he has ended up. He soon realizes that departing from here without first fixing the engine would be completely impossible. He searches for tools throughout the entire ship, and after many hours of strenuous effort, he finally manages to repair the engine. For him, this is the most relieving moment, but the problem is far from over. He tries to make contact on the radio once more, but once again, he receives no response. A weary Eric comes up the stairs and suddenly feels the urgent need to urinate. When he sees no one nearby, he decides to take care of his business right at the ship's railing. But the moment he stands there at the edge, suddenly, someone gives him a powerful shove. He plunges directly into the ocean below. Amidst the strong current and the fierce wind pressure, he struggles to surface. But with great difficulty, he manages to grab a rope hanging from the ship, saving himself from drowning. Gathering all his courage, he slowly pulls himself up and climbs back onto the ship. He hadn't quite composed himself when he went down to the toilet again. Suddenly, someone slammed the door shut. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but when he tried to get out, he found the lock was bolted from the inside. His breath caught in his throat at this sight. He tried every possible way to open the lock. He even tries to take a coin from his pocket and attempts to unlock it, but nothing at all seems to work. Now he becomes absolutely certain that he is not alone on this ship. There's an unseen presence constantly moving around him, though he cannot perceive it. The clear, malevolent intention of some unknown, unseen force to torment him begins to manifest. He shouts loudly, "Whoever you are, please open the door. I've only come to look." But he receives no reply. Amidst growing fear and profound unease, he slowly moves towards the cabin, and what he sees upon arrival sends a chilling shiver down his spine. Bloodstains are splattered across the floor. The atmosphere was so terrifying any ordinary person would have fled from that place, but Eric, he gathers his courage, he picks up a pair of scissors and attempts to force open the door. Just at that moment, the entire ship suddenly begins to shake violently. It feels like a huge impending disaster is about to strike. Overcome with fear, he rushes upstairs and peers out a window. In the distance, a colossal cargo vessel is seen speeding directly towards them. A head-on collision with their own ship was about to occur. Eric realizes that if there's a collision, he won't make it out alive. He desperately tries to somehow grab their attention. He rips off his shirt and frantically waves it high in the air, but the enormous vessel is simply too vast to notice him. Now, only one desperate course of action remains: to halt the ship. Just then, his eyes land on a long, thick rope dangling by the window. He immediately thinks of a solution. He ties the rope and throws it into the water, hoping to slow the boat's momentum. But instead, the situation only escalates. The rope gets caught in the engine's spinning blade, pulls inward, and its noose wraps tightly around Eric's neck. The sudden, powerful tug makes him gasp for breath. However, at the very last moment, he manages to cut the rope with a tool and somehow saves himself. After the incident where the rope had tightened around his neck, Eric's neck was completely red. He was suffocating and had almost died. But at the last moment, he mustered his remaining strength and freed himself. The boat's speed abruptly slowed when the rope got caught in the engine. But this relief was short-lived, as the massive cargo ship approaching from the front showed no signs of stopping. In just a matter of seconds, the massive ship violently slammed into his boat. The impact was so devastating that the entire small vessel shook and Eric was thrown to the deck. His head hit a He was deeply wounded and immediately lost consciousness. When he regained his senses a little while later, he found himself back in that very same bathroom, where the water had now risen almost up to his neck. But what truly terrified him the most was that this wasn't the salty water of the sea, but instead, it was perfectly sweet and crystal clear. It felt as if someone was deliberately and methodically taking every single step to completely shatter him mentally. Completely exhausted and utterly broken, Eric started to beg, "Whatever this is, please, just let me get out of here." But throughout the entire ship, there was only that same chilling silence, which, with each passing moment, terrified him even more profoundly. Driven to desperation by hunger and thirst, he drank the last of the water left from the shower. But within a few short moments, that too was entirely gone. When he tried to drink from the sink, the water's taste had completely changed. Now it was salty. From this, he realized that somewhere in the ship, a leak had occurred, and seawater had begun to pour inside. As soon as he grasped this, his panic intensified even further, because it clearly meant that this boat would not be able to remain afloat for much longer. He desperately tried to open the door, but to his dismay, it was securely locked from the outside. It felt as though some unseen, invisible force was closely monitoring his every single move, actively preventing him from escaping. As night fell, the water continued to rise, and he was utterly exhausted. Finally, overcome by sheer exhaustion, he drifted off to sleep. That night, a violent storm raged across the sea, shaking the ship to its very foundations, and Eric sustained several fresh injuries. When he finally awoke in the morning, the water had already reached his face, just a few more inches, and he would have surely drowned. Then, all of a sudden, he heard a faint click, like a lock being opened. He somehow managed to turn the handle, and at that very moment, the water pressure was so immense that the door completely broke and fell down. The swift, powerful current offered him a brief window to escape, and he somehow managed to reach the ship's upper deck, just to finally breathe some much-needed fresh air. By now, he was absolutely convinced that this vessel was far from ordinary. Some unseen, malevolent power seemed to be controlling it, and for some unknown reason, it simply refused to release him. He was completely broken, both in body and in mind. The water level was continuously rising below, and the ship could go down at any moment. In the midst of this fear, a solution came to his mind. He picked up the airbags from the ship and the broken bathroom door, and from these, he constructed a small raft. Then he tied it up very well, making it sturdy, and gathered food, water, and essential tools from the ship, placing them onto the raft. Without a single glance back, he abandoned the ship, climbed onto the raft, and began to move forward across the vast sea. However, even after several hours had passed, he hadn't managed to get very far from that enormous ship. The most peculiar thing was that the very ship he had witnessed sinking early that morning was still standing there, completely motionless, in the exact same state. He simply couldn't comprehend why. Despite such a colossal leak and the immense amount of water that had filled it, the vessel still refused to sink. Then an idea suddenly struck him. If it hadn't gone down yet, why not just try to repair it? He returned to the ship and first repaired the leak. Then, using pipes and various tools, he fashioned a temporary pump, slowly but surely draining all the water that had filled the vessel. Following this, he also repaired the other sections of the boat to ensure no further problems would arise. Once the work was done, he went to the radio again and tried to call for assistance. But even this time, there was no reply. Exhausted and disheartened, he then went back to the control room and started poring over the maps. When he started the engine, his hopes were shattered once more. The vessel didn't budge an inch. It was as if the ocean had glued it firmly in place. He was utterly broken when suddenly his gaze fell upon another ship far off. At this sight, a fresh ray of hope ignited deep within him. He immediately grabbed the raft and began paddling with all his strength towards the distant ship. But then, quite suddenly, the ship began to move menacingly in his direction. It was as if some unseen force was propelling him directly towards Eric. Eric tried to increase his speed, but the massive vessel only accelerated further. Just moments before the inevitable collision, Eric, in a desperate final attempt, leapt from his raft and began swimming through the open sea towards another distant boat that was moving away. But by the time he finally reached that spot, the boat had completely vanished from sight. He was now fully convinced that some evil force was on this mysterious ship, not letting him leave under any circumstances. He swore that even if it cost him his life, he would not return to that ship. But the ocean water was slowly getting colder and colder. His body was becoming numb. Dolphins were swimming down below, but the situation was so bad that staying in the water for an extended period was impossible. Shivering uncontrollably from the biting cold and feeling utterly helpless, he eventually, out of sheer desperation, made the difficult decision to swim back towards the very ship he had been so desperately trying to escape. He had become so profoundly weak and gravely ill that he no longer possessed the mental capacity or even the physical strength to think clearly. He quietly found his way to a cabin on the ship, wrapped himself in a warm blanket, and quickly succumbed to a deep restorative sleep. The next morning, when Eric's eyes opened, his first desire was to escape this dreadful ship by any means necessary. But as soon as he got up and took a step towards the door, his heart sank. The door to the room was closed once again. He was completely trapped inside. This new predicament began to break his spirit even further. He couldn't understand why this ship was behaving in such a way with him. What mysterious force had held him captive? Suddenly, his eyes fell upon a small wooden cabin built into one corner of the room. The moment he opened it, a narrow passage became visible, leading directly upwards. It was a ventilation shaft, through which he might potentially be able to escape to the outside. Eric then squeezed himself into that small cabin, which was an extremely cramped, dark, and dust-filled storage area. He attempted to climb upwards many times, but on each and every occasion, he would inevitably slip and fall back down. As he fell, he also suffered injuries to his back, hands, and feet. But he did not stop. Falling again and again, picking himself up each time, he eventually made his way to the ventilation window. He pushed the window with all his strength. He tugged and shook it, but it wouldn't move even an inch. It felt as if someone had purposely locked him tightly from the outside. Meanwhile, he realized that the air inside this enclosed space was slowly running out. Breathing was becoming increasingly difficult. The way to go back down was also gone, as the door had been shut. He began to feel that perhaps this would become his final resting place. Just then, the same mysterious click sound echoed once again. It was precisely the same sound he had heard on numerous occasions before, and with that distinct click, the vent's window suddenly swung open by itself. Eric didn't waste a single precious moment and quickly rushed outside. As the cold, crisp, fresh air filled his lungs, he felt a brief moment of calm. When he peered down from the ship's deck, he suddenly realized that the vessel was moving on its own towards a small, deserted island. A faint glimmer of hope began to stir within his troubled mind. Perhaps this was his only opportunity to escape this accursed vessel. The moment the ship reached the shore, Eric immediately stepped off. As his feet touched the ground, he felt certain that someone was hiding on this very island behind the entire mystery. In a fit of anger, he picked up a sturdy wooden stick from the path and began searching all around him. However, it wasn't long before he realized that this island was completely desolate and barren. There were no huts, no lingering traces of fire, and absolutely no footprints. The very idea of any human being present here was simply out of the question. Upon witnessing this, his anger swiftly transformed into sheer terror. Who, after all, could possibly be orchestrating all of this? As he emerged from the island's confines, his eyes were immediately drawn to a peculiar sight. The very same enigmatic vessel that had transported him to this remote location was now serenely gliding across the vast ocean surface. It seemed to be on the hunt for another victim. Upon witnessing this, Eric grew absolutely certain that this vessel was not under human control, but rather commanded by some dark, perilous force. If he wished to save his own life, he would immediately have to find a way to escape this island. While searching, he eventually reached the island's highest peak. From that vantage point, he spotted another island far off, but it was so distant that he couldn't quite make out what was occurring there. He then circled around to the island's rear side and descended, and that's when his breath hitched. He had arrived at the very same place where his whole strange experience had first started. The identical shoreline, the exact same atmosphere, and the most astonishing revelation. His own small boat was still tied right there, in the exact same condition as he had left it on the very first day. Even the people standing around were going about their business quite normally, as if absolutely nothing had happened at all. Eric was left completely speechless. He simply couldn't believe everything he had just gone through. The sheer terror, the ship's dark mystery, the locked rooms, strange voices, the constant threats of death, and this desolate island. Was it all true? Or just a part of some terrible illusion? But his deep wounds, his utter exhaustion, his labored breathing, and his harrowing experience clearly proved that this was no mere dream. Now the pressing question was, how did his boat manage to get back there? And what was the real, underlying truth of this mysterious island?